The artifact in my hand was dying, and so was my last chance at freedom. Lightning split the sky above the fortress, turning rain into silver knives. I thought I was alone until I heard him. Footsteps slow, deliberate. The predator knew I had nowhere left to run. I froze, the sun heart pulsing hot against my palm, expecting an empty corridor. Instead, Alpha Rowan appeared, drenched in rain, eyes burning with a possessive intensity I couldn't escape. 2 nights he had stalked my door. 2 nights he had fought the fury that demanded I belonged to him. If he stepped closer,
Protect what
I'd
matters,
break
even if it destroys
or surrender. I pressed against the cold stone, gripping the relic, remembering my father's words. Protect what matters, even if it destroys you. But when our eyes met, I realized the sun heart wasn't the only thing pulsing between us. I never expected the Alpha who destroyed my family to be the one keeping me alive. But then again, I never expected much from fate except loss and ashes. The northern territories beyond these walls know only violence. The village I left behind knows only to forget those who vanish into Rowan's fortress. That arrangement should have terrified me into compliance. Captives learn their place quickly here. The storm only drowns what refuses to bend. My name is Neria. The artifact I carry is the only thing my bloodline left me, along with a legacy of stolen magic and a head full of warnings. Never let them see what you are. Never trust an Alpha. Never stay past the 3rd night. My father was a guardian of the old light. I am only the shadow of one. That night the storm had claws. It tore at the fortress stones as I moved through the dimly lit corridor, sun heart hidden beneath my cloak, heading for the eastern passage. The hunters of the light had been drawing closer lately, their presence scraping against my senses like blades on glass. I checked the guard rotations, counted the minutes until the watch changed, whispered a prayer I didn't believe to gods who had abandoned us long ago. Then I heard it, not thunder, not the groan of ancient architecture or the scurry of fortress rats. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the direction I needed to go. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs, the artifact flaring hot enough to sear through fabric. The corridor stretched before me like a throat, swallowing what little light the wall sconces offered. Behind me only locked doors and dead ends. Running, little scavenger. His voice rolled through the darkness like distant thunder, rich and cold and inevitable. Alpha Rowan stepped into the flickering light, rain streaming from his shoulders, his presence filling every inch of space until the air itself felt too thin to breathe. He didn't look like the monster from the stories, the wolfless Alpha who had clawed his way back to power through blood and ruthlessness. He looked like something worse, a man who had already decided I belonged to him. "You have 1 night left," he said, his gaze dropping to where my hand pressed against my cloak, where the sun heart pulsed like a second heart. "1 night to prove you understand what I've been trying to tell you." I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, to use the artifact's power, to shatter every window in this cursed place if that's what it took to escape. But his eyes held me frozen, not with fear, but with the terrible recognition that he wasn't blocking my escape. He was blocking the assassins who had been waiting in the eastern passage. "They've come for you, Neria," Rowan said, and for the first time since my capture, I heard something other than the tower room had a single window, too narrow for escape, wide enough to see everything I was leaving behind. Rowan locked the door himself, the iron key vanishing into his coat with a finality that made my stomach turn. 3 nights, he said, his back still to me. "That's all I'm offering you." I pressed myself against the far wall, the sun heart hidden in the folds of my dress, its heat a small comfort against the cold seeping through the stones. 3 nights until what? Until you decide I'm useful or disposable. He turned then, and the lamplight caught the sharp angles of his face, the brutal beauty of a man who had survived things that should have killed him. 3 nights to prove you understand the difference between a cage and a sanctuary. My laugh came out bitter. You destroyed my family, you razed the southern holdings, don't pretend this is protection. If your family sold you to the hunters before I ever touched their lands. His voice was flat, factual, and somehow that made it worse. The raids weren't conquest, Neria, they were extraction. I took what they were already planning to sacrifice. The name on his lips made me flinch. I hadn't told him my name, hadn't told him anything except the lies I'd prepared. You don't believe me, Rowan continued, moving closer with that predatory grace that made every instinct scream. You won't believe me until you see their blades, but by then it will be too late for both of us. He stopped just beyond arm's reach, his eyes dropping to where my hand pressed against my abdomen, where the artifact pulsed beneath fabric and skin. So I'm giving you 3 nights. Prove to me you can see past your hate long enough to survive what's coming, or don't. His smile was cold and sharp. Either way, this ends in blood. The door locked behind. He came to me after midnight, when the storm had softened to a whisper against the stones. I wasn't sleeping, hadn't slept since the moment he'd brought me here. The sun heart lay on the small table beside the bed, its glow dimmed but steady, and I kept one hand near it at all times. Rowan didn't knock. The lock simply clicked open, and he filled the doorway like a shadow given form. He'd shed the emerald coat, and in the thin shirt beneath I could see the breadth of his shoulders, the coiled strength that made him dangerous even without the wolf he'd lost. Tell me about the orb, he said, closing the door behind him. No. He moved into the room with deliberate slowness, circling toward the table where the sun heart rested. That wasn't a request, little scavenger. I lunged for the artifact, but he was faster, his hand closing around my wrist with enough pressure to stop me without bruising. The sun heart flared bright between us, responding to my panic, and for a moment we were frozen in its golden light. Your father gave this to you, Rowan said quietly, his thumb pressing against my racing pulse. Kaelan of the Sunborn line. He put it in your hands the night I came for him, told you to run, told you to hide it where the light couldn't reach. His grip tightened fractionally. What he didn't tell you was why the hunters wanted it, why they were willing to burn your entire bloodline to ash to possess it. My breath caught. You're lying. Your father was my friend. The words fell like stones into dark water. Before the curse, before the council's betrayal, before I became this. His free hand gestured vaguely at himself, at the infamous monster he'd been forced to become. He knew what they would do to you if they found out you could wield it, so he asked me to come for you first. Tears burned hot against my eyes. He would never. He loved. The blade came through the window in a shower of broken glass, spinning end over end toward Rowan's back. I saw it before he did, saw the poison-black sheen on the steel, the deliberate arc that would bury it between his ribs. I didn't think, didn't plan. The sun heart was in my hands before I could question why it mattered, before I could ask myself why I cared if the monster who'd caged me lived or died. The artifact erupted in a wall of golden flame that caught the blade mid-flight and melted it to smoking slag. The heat washed over us both, and Rowan spun with inhuman speed, his hand going to the knife at his belt even as his eyes found mine. Assassin, he growled, already moving toward the shattered window. Stay here. But the second blade had already found its mark, slicing across his shoulder as he leaned out into the rain. Blood bloomed dark against his shirt, and the scent of it hit me like a fist, copper and earth and something deeper, something that made the sun heart pulse hot against my palms. Rowan staggered, his hand going to the wound, and I saw his face go pale in a way that had nothing to do with blood loss. "Wolfsbane," he said through gritted teeth. "Damn them." The poison was spreading fast, black veins crawling up his neck, and he dropped to one knee with a sound that might have been pain or fury. His eyes found mine, and in them I saw not the predator who'd captured me, but something raw and almost human. "Let me die," he said quietly. "It's what you want." It should have been. Every rational part of me knew I should step back, should let the poison finish what the assassin started. Freedom was 3 feet away and one dying breath. But my hands were already moving, the sun heart blazing so bright it hurt to look at, and I pressed it against the wound before I could stop myself. The artifact's power poured into him like liquid light, burning away the poison, sealing flesh, and Rowan's scream was a sound torn from something deeper than human agony. When it was done, the second night, he came to me with his shirt already unlaced, the fabric hanging open to reveal the topography of violence carved across his chest. I'd been standing at the window, watching the rain, when his presence filled the doorway like a gathering storm. "You saved my life," Rowan said without preamble. "That means I owe you truth." He moved into the lamplight, and I saw it clearly for the first time. The scar that split his chest from collar to sternum, the tissue raised and twisted in a way that spoke of magic and malice entwined. It looked like something had been ripped out of him, leaving only the wound behind. "The mark of the wolfless," I whispered, recognition dawning cold. "The price of mercy." His smile was bitter as poison. "I spared a traitor's child." "The council decided that made me weak, unfit to rule. So they took my wolf, bound it in silver and sorcery, and left me to die in the frozen wastes." His hand traced the scar with something like reverence. "I survived. Clawed my way back to power without the one thing that made me alpha. Every man who stands at my back does so because they chose to follow a broken king." The vulnerability in his voice was worse than any cruelty. I took a step closer, drawn by something I didn't want to name. "Why tell me this?" "Because you need to understand what protection costs in this world." His eyes locked on mine, dark and infinite. "I am not the monster you think I am, Neria. I am the monster I had to become to keep wolves like me from devouring everything soft and bright." His hand rose, hovering near my face but not quite touching. "And you are the first soft thing I've wanted to keep." The rain hammered against the stones. The sun heart pulsed between us like a second heartbeat, and I realized with creeping I found them in the eastern wing, in rooms I'd been told were storage. The door was barely ajar, but the sound of children's laughter cut through the storm's howl like a blade through silk. My siblings, Mara and Finn, alive. Rage flooded hot and immediate. I shoved the door open, the sun heart blazing in my hand, ready to burn this entire fortress down if that's what it took to free them. But they weren't chained, weren't cowering. They were sitting at a table laden with food, warm and clean, and laughing at something Rowan's lieutenant had just said. "Neria." Mara's face lit up, and she rushed toward me with the unself-conscious joy of a child who hadn't been tortured. "You're here. Alpha Rowan said you'd come when you were ready." The sun heart dimmed in my confusion. "What?" Finn looked up from his meal, crumbs on his face. "He's been teaching me swordcraft, says I have the hands for it." The lieutenant, a scarred woman named Kessa, rose smoothly. "The Alpha brought them north 3 weeks ago, said their village was compromised, that the hunters were coming." Her expression was carefully neutral. "He's been personally overseeing their care." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in my ears. "He kidnapped you." "He saved us," Mara said simply. "The men with the white cloaks came the night after we left. They burned everything, Neria. Everyone who stayed behind is gone." The floor tilted beneath me. I'd been so certain. so convinced that Rowan was the villain, that everything he'd done was motivated by cruelty and possession. But my siblings were fed, were safe, were alive when they should have been ashes. The third night came with fire and screaming. The hunters breached the gates at dawn, their white cloaks pristine against the blood-soaked stones, their blades singing with righteous fury. I watched from the tower window as they cut through Rowan's guards like wheat before a scythe, and the sun heart burned hot against my chest. These were supposed to be my saviours, the holy warriors who fought against tyrants like Rowan. But the way they moved, the way they smiled as they killed, there was nothing holy in it. Rowan burst through my door, blood streaking his face, his movements already sluggish. "They're here for you," he said, and his voice carried the weight of prophecy. "Everything I warned you about." Then he collapsed, and I saw the dart buried in his neck, the blackened veins spreading from the wound. Not wolfsbane this time, something worse. Rowan. I caught him before he hit the floor, the sun heart flaring in response to my panic. His skin was already cold, his breathing shallow. "Run," he whispered through blue-tinged lips. "Take your siblings." "There's a passage." The door exploded inward. 3 hunters filled the frame, their white cloaks unmarked, their faces serene. The leader stepped forward, and I recognized him from my childhood, Commander Aldrich, who used to bring gifts to my father. "Nearer Sunborn," he said warmly, as if we were meeting for tea instead of amid carnage. "Finally, we've been searching for you for so long." I pressed myself between Rowan's dying body and the hunters, the sun heart blazing. "Stay back. That artifact belongs to the light," Aldrich continued, his smile never wavering. "Your father stole it when he betrayed our cause. We've been cleaning up his mess ever since." His eyes dropped to Rowan. "Starting with the monsters he conspired with." "He's not a monster. He's an abomination, a wolfless alpha clinging to power through fear." Aldrich's hand extended. "Give us the sun heart and we'll make his death quick. Keep fighting and we'll make you watch while we..." The sun heart was never meant to heal. My father had told me that once in the days when he still believed I'd never have to use it. The artifact was a weapon forged in the first wars, designed to unmake what should never have been made. Breaking it would release everything it had been holding back. I pressed the orb against Rowan's chest, right over the scar where his wolf had been torn away, and I shattered it with a scream that came from somewhere deeper than my lungs. The explosion of light turned the world white. I heard the hunters' screams, felt their bodies blown backward like leaves in a storm. But I only had eyes for Rowan, for the way the golden light poured into his wound like water into a broken vessel. The artifact's energy didn't burn him. It sang to something buried deep, something that had been sleeping in the darkness of his curse. His back arched, his eyes snapping open, and they were no longer human. They were ancient, primordial. The eyes of something that had walked the earth before men learned to fear wolves. His scream shook the foundations of the fortress as his body began to change, not into the wolf he'd lost, but into something older, something the curse had never been designed to contain. Bone and muscle reshaped beneath his skin, and when he rose, he was no longer just Rowan. He was the alpha the first alphas had feared. The primordial looked at me with Rowan's eyes, and I saw recognition beneath the rage. Then he turned toward the door, toward the hunters scrambling to retreat, and his smile was full of teeth that could tear through steel. The siege ended in a bloodbath that painted the fortress stones red. I watched from the tower window as the primordial tore through the hunters like they were made of paper, his movements too fast to follow, his fury a physical force that shattered shields and snapped swords. When it was over, when the last hunter's body hit the ground, he stood in the courtyard drenched in rain and blood, his chest heaving, his eyes still glowing with that terrible ancient light. I should have been terrified. Everything I'd feared about Rowan had just been proven true. He was a monster, powerful and deadly and capable of horrors I couldn't imagine. But as I watched him turn his face toward my window, as I saw the way his expression softened when his eyes found mine, I understood something that shattered every wall I'd built. The monster I'd feared was the only one who had ever truly seen me. The darkness I'd run from was the only thing standing between me and oblivion. And the love he'd been offering, possessive and consuming and absolute, was the only real thing in a world built on pretty lies. I left the tower and found him in the courtyard. He didn't move as I approached, didn't speak, just watched me with those ancient eyes as rain washed the blood from his skin. "I was wrong," I said quietly, "about everything. You were afraid." His voice was still layered with the primordial's power, but softer now, almost human. "Fear makes liars of us all." I reached up and touched his face, and he leaned into my palm like a man starved for gentleness. "I'm not afraid anymore." "You should be." His hand covered mine, pressing it harder against his cheek. "This is what I am now, what I'll always be, dark and violent and hungry for you in ways that aren't civilized." "Good," I whispered, "because I'm done with civil." We stood on the balcony 3 weeks later, watching the sun rise over territories that were ours now, claimed not through conquest, but through the simple fact that no one was stupid enough to challenge a primordial alpha and the woman who'd unleashed him. Rowan's arm wrapped around my waist, possessive and warm, his chin resting on my shoulder. The mark he'd left on my throat the night before still ached, a claiming that went deeper than skin, and I traced it absently. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who believed in heroes and villains, in simple morality and clean victories. That girl was gone, burned away in the Sun Heart's final fire. What remained was something sharper, something that understood that love could be dark and still be real, that protection could look like possession and still be chosen. "None," I said, and meant it. Below us, my siblings trained with Kessa in the courtyard, their laughter carrying on the morning wind. Around us, the fortress was being rebuilt, not as a cage but as a home. And beside me stood the monster I'd stopped fearing, the king I'd chosen, the alpha whose love was the most dangerous and honest thing I'd ever known. Rowan turned me in his arms, his eyes, still carrying hints of the primordial's glow, searching mine. "Queen," he said, and the word was both question and coronation. I kissed him, tasting forever and darkness and the strange bright joy of being truly, completely seen. "King," I answered against his lips. The third night had destroyed everything I thought I knew, but from those ashes we'd built something new, something dark and beautiful and entirely ours. The storm clouds gathered on the horizon because there would always be storms. But this time I was. As the sun rises over a kingdom rebuilt from ashes, one truth remains. Love doesn't always come wrapped in light. Sometimes it comes as thunder, as teeth and fire and choice. The third night shattered who she was, but it crowned who she became. A queen who chose the storm instead of running from it. Now tell me, if you stood beside the thunder, would you choose it too? Would you accept a love that is dark, dangerous, and utterly honest? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if this story stirred something in you, like, subscribe and stay with me, because more moonlit wars, fated bonds, and forbidden